You are an outspoken whistleblower. You've called out the Davos elite.
Our old systems are not fit for the 21st century. We need a great reset.
How did you get to a point where you helped build the WEF's Great Reset?
In 2020, I get my dream job. So I'm the Chief Sustainability Officer at Deutsche Bank. When I was there, that's when I see the fraud. Everything is a marketing scam. The bottom line is this. We cannot issue this annual report. This is a legal living document. It is filled with lies. And a couple of weeks later, I was fired. And the next day, the annual report came out with all the lies. They don't just fire me. They go on this horrific smear campaign. Within 2 days, the U.S. authorities call me up, the SEC, the FBI, and the Department of Justice. And they ask me,
You're going further and saying they're controlling the world.
the WEF is huge. Its tentacles affect every part of your life. This isn't stakeholder capitalism. This is socialism. They're lying to the public. They've manufactured a climate crisis. It's a multi-trillion-dollar industrial complex. The Davos agenda is much more than just net zero. The Davos agenda is about...
Desiree, I should ask, did you ever meet Klaus Schwab?
Yes.
Anything to say about it?
Truthfully,
Before we get into this interview, I just wanted to say that we have noticed that more than half of our regular viewers are not subscribed. If you want to support the Winston Marshall Show, all you have to do is press subscribe. If you do that, we can have more phenomenal guests exploring the issues you want to hear about that the mainstream media won't touch. But without further ado, on with the interview. Desiree Fixler, thank you so much for coming to speak with me. You have gone viral several times now over the last few months because you are an outspoken whistleblower. You've called out the Davos elite, Klaus Schwab, and the machinations of the WEF, or WEF as you've been calling it before we started. Before we get into all of that, I want to know your story. How did you get to a point where, as you say, you helped build the WEF's Great Reset?
Sure. It starts pretty mundane. I was an investment banker working between London and Frankfurt at big firms. And of course, like even back then, I started in 1994. Bankers kind of had a bad reputation. There was always like a wanker in the banker. Mm-hmm. And, it was in the ride up to the great financial crisis, I could see that the excess was too much, even for me. I loved it and I benefited from it, but it mismarketing became all too acceptable. It really became way too excessive. And so I decided to take a step out, and I got involved with socially responsible investing. And I thought that was a way that, I could say, yes, I'm a banker, but I'm a good banker. Mm. So I started my journey, this whole ESG, WEF journey from kind of the mid-2000s. I'm like one of the original people in this movement. That's why I say from the years, from 2005 through to, 2021, I was a chief architect of all of this stuff. I supported it. I'm not saying I worked for Klaus Schwab, but I worked for other firms building the buy-in for this agenda. Okay,
so this is before the crash that you actually have this moment where you want to do more responsible investing and professional behavior. So how does that begin exactly? What did that look like? What were the first things enticing you? Was it net zero? I mean, it's probably a bit too early for net zero.
It was a little bit too early.
Shareholder capitalism?
It was,
stakeholder, I should say.
Exactly.
Shareholder being Milton Friedman.
Exactly. Yeah. Milton's version, which of course I was raised on. But then, of course, you get introduced to Klaus Schwab's version, stakeholder capitalism. And that's perfect. Profit with purpose. Capitalism with a conscience. And I thought to myself, wow, this is an amazing opportunity. So I had two hats on. I had my banker hat that knew this would sell. This is profitable stuff, right? This has a great narrative around it. And then the other side said, I truly believe in this. We can make a difference. We can take institutional money and we could invest it in strategies that offer great financial returns plus positive social and environmental impact. So I did believe in it, but I did it because it was profitable, right? I had senior positions. So what drove me is, in all honesty, at that time was a belief in it, but I also knew it was the next big thing. So I wasn't surprised how it took off, but I understood that this was a hugely growing market and it would attract trillions of dollars of capital flows, which it did. And that's how I segued into it.
Perhaps you can explain to me why it is profitable, because it doesn't actually, on the surface level, appear that it is obviously profitable. For example, Milton, his idea of shareholder capitalism is all about profit, whereas stakeholder capitalism, as I've understood it, explained by Schwab himself in his various books, it's where everyone is included, and it's not just about profit. It's all of these other contingencies, all these other issues, the environment, the society, all of these other things need to be considered. Everyone has to be considered when making every single decision for all these businesses. So actually, it's going against the model of profit making, right?
You're absolutely right.
So why then did you consider it profitable?
Because it was a marketing scam. Because at this point in time, you could sell a story and double your fees. You could charge more for it. That's why. So it wasn't my intent to do that because, of course, there's a story around this. Well, we have to do extra due diligence. We have to care for these other non-financial factors. But we charged investors, we charged the consumer more for this. So that's why it was highly profitable. But obviously, at some point, the game is up.
Right, okay. So then can you give me some examples then of this, it happening in industry that you would be an example of one of these sort of profitable endeavors?
Okay, well, I mean, you just have, okay, so in my career, I start as a regular banker, I segue into, ESG, and then in 2020, I get my dream job. So I'm the chief sustainability officer at Deutsche Bank's roughly $1 trillion asset manager, and it's called, for whatever reason, DWS. But it's a subsidiary of Deutsche Bank. So I'm in the Deutsche Bank group.
Okay.
And I thought to myself, wow, $1 trillion. Wow, like we can, we'll be making this as a for-profit, venture, we'll be making a lot of money, but we can also, offer some good. When I was there, that's when I see the fraud. So at the very beginning, I knew this is profitable. My salary is high. I'm getting paid very well, right? You kind of have a seat at the table suddenly, that, the world had changed after the great financial crisis. So you're kind of in this Davos spotlight and lauded for the good that you're doing. That does go to your head, right? That's, you're not thinking about it at the time, right? You're just doing your job.
Right.
And, there's tremendous momentum. But when you're asking me, an example, I was sitting there at DWS, working with all my portfolio managers, and it was boom times for ESG investing. And the team knew that we can charge probably double the amount of fees on anything that said green, that said justice, social justice, that said ESG, sustainability. And then you have, the UN's 17 Sustainable Development Goals. So just slap that label on it and oversell it, and we can double our fees for doing absolutely nothing.
Even though you started this before the crash, am I right in understanding that the crash was a kind of moment where people working in finance were like, well, we've got to be more responsible here. So was this ESG stuff a reaction to the crash? I mean, I know it existed before, but it was at this moment, it was like, maybe we've screwed up here.
100%. And we need rebranding.
Rebranding.
100%. You remember at the time, like Goldman Sachs, for whatever reason, I mean, everyone was doing it, but Goldman Sachs was singled out as, I think they called it, the giant vampire squid, suffocating the world, right? So it was at a time Wall Street needed rebranding, it needed a shield. After the great financial crisis, there was so much distrust in the system. And then remember, there are bailouts. So now there's fury from everyone saying, why are we bailing out these people that caused the problem? And by the way, they're still in the seats. No one's getting arrested, and they're still, getting fat checks. They're still making their bonuses. So there was absolute outrage.
Yes.
And so Wall Street understood, the elite understood, oh shit, if we need to keep this going,
yes,
we need to rebrand and we need a shield.
Mm-hmm.
And absolutely, that's exactly right. That's when you see, multinationals and especially Wall Street start to accept ESG doctrine.
Yes.
Right? Start talking about stakeholder capitalism.
Yes.
And then, of course, now we hit the 20 teens and you've got movements like, the Paris Climate Agreement.
Yes.
You have the UN Sustainable Development Goals being set. You've got the Me Too movement, right? So there's a lot of
and then
social
woke capitalism.
100%.
So from George Floyd, really.
100%. Absolutely. Now, absolutely. COVID happens and that's when it explodes. And that's actually when ESG goes mainstream, not as an option, but it's mandatory. From starting in 2020 onwards, it's mandatory to merge, to blur the line between business and government, to blur the line between profit and purpose. You have to set goals for your climate action. You have to adopt DEI strategies. It becomes actually for every corporation, and by the way, government, the license to operate.
What do you mean the license to operate?
That unless you are ESG driven, unless you back net zero, you back climate action, you back DEI, addressing inequality, you cannot function either legitimately as a company or as a government. You know that there is so much outrage in the public that internally in the boardroom, and I don't care whether it's an NGO, it's a government committee, or it's a multinational corporation, what was being discussed is we understand if we don't become political, we're not going to have a client base, we're not going to have a consumer base, and so we have to go out there with these goals, right? It's not about optimizing. It was absolutely complete intentionality and moving from Milton Friedman's model of shareholder primacy to the stakeholder model
which was pioneered by Schwab.
100%, where you're serving, obviously, your employees, your clients, your community, but now you have these bigger goals. You're actually serving society and the planet. Oh, and then, by the way, maybe your shareholders. And that's where it absolutely shifts to where every single operating business had to toe the party line to adapt to stakeholder capitalism. That's absolutely in response to COVID, Black Lives Matters, all the social unrest events. Yes.
Well, I want to come back to stakeholder capitalism in practice, because it's not entirely clear to me how that even works, because if everyone's involved in decision-making, no one's involved in decision-making. But we'll come back to that. You say it was mandatory. In fact, we should rewind one step even further, because ESG, environmental, social, and governance, it's worth explaining to people who are not familiar with this, what exactly that means and what is the doctrine of ESG.
Sure. It was termed in 2004 in a UN paper, Who Cares Wins. So it starts brewing back then, but it's very niche. And as I said, I start getting involved, I start dabbling in this, or actually moving into it in 2005. But remember, this is a niche market. It is not mainstream. So the concept is that you can do capitalism better. That ultimately capitalism will fail because of climate change. There'll be no world left. Or because of social unrest, because of inequality. So therefore, business in order to be sustainably profitable, have to factor in environmental and social objectives. But that's brewing, but it doesn't take hold till post GFC. And then it becomes mainstream, as you rightly say, during COVID, where everyone adopts this.
Yeah, so at which point you're marinating it. And so it's sort of self-congratulatory. Everyone is saying, well done. Oh, well done for doing more ESG. Well done for DEI. There's no one questioning it.
That's right.
It's just absolute dogma.
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, forgive me. So after the crash, you were saying?
Yeah. So, after the crash, there's just, more and more events where you start seeing, it becomes fully mainstream. And, to understand what it is, and it really does blow your mind, is that businesses, rather than like in the boardroom focusing on, well, how do we make better products and services? Businesses have to start talking about, ooh, can we save some polar bears? Ooh, is there some climate justice we can do in Bangladesh? And this is what's odious about this, because you're now blurring lines. I mean, for example, I'd throw this example out to you. Would you want to fly on an airlines that diverts more money to like polar bear savior someplace probably where it's not needed? Or, they're, putting money into unproven green technologies, right? Do you want to fly on that airline that's diverting its cash flow to boondoggles? Or do you want to fly on an airline that, maintains, doesn't blur business and politics, but just says we want to be the best airline. We want to be the safest. And so cash flow is just going into maintenance and safety, right? It's a rhetorical question because, of course, I know we'll all vote, to ride the airline that is just dedicated to be the safest airline, not an airline that starts getting confused with its money and running around on junkets.
Well, that's not actually clear to me, because for a long time, I think the market was actually making decisions, if they could afford it, to choose the sustainable option, to choose the environmentally friendly option, to choose the woke option, whatever brought sort of racial justice. I think that there was a fever pitch.
100%.
Certainly really after Trump was elected until maybe the pushback began, which has been the last few years, where the market was making those decisions. So it's not clear to me, as you say, that people wanted to choose the no-nonsense, profit-making businesses.
You're 100% right at that time, but it's a marketing scam. It's all virtue signaling.
Sick of the ads? Want to support this show directly? Want bonus content? Well, head to our Substack, where you'll get all of those benefits and more. It's all over at winstonmarshall.co.uk, where you can sign up today. But if you don't use Substack and still want to support us directly here, then check out YouTube membership. With your support, we can continue to grow this show, get on guests that you want to hear about, and explore the sticky issues that the corporate and mainstream media just won't touch. But enough from me, back to the interview.
And there was some diversion of cash. But like today, when I get asked, why am I against ESG? That's the reason I give. Thankfully, we've stopped that nonsense, but it could have brought us to a place where, companies are producing less viable products and services because they really do have to push more cash flow into saving the planet.
Okay, so at some point, there was a turning point where the products were getting worse.
Without a doubt. But remember, the starting point is that customers are getting ripped off. There's a big difference between like aspiration, intention, and results. So you've got all types of businesses distracting themselves and, saying, oh, we need more girls. We need to hire more people of color, right? Moving away from the best talent bench, right? Because DEI is being forced on them. You're diverting cash flow into like, let's look at energy companies, right? There was a real effect. And you're absolutely right. There was a craze where shareholders were starting and consumers were starting to lean on energy companies to say, you guys can't like drill any more fossil fuels. You need to move into renewable energy. And the US oil majors were slower to adopt ESG, but here in Europe and in the UK, they went nuts. So you see companies like British Petroleum, Danish Oil and Gas, Shell, they moved their energy portfolio from oil and gas into, offshore wind, solar panels, green hydrogen. And there was a real effect on the bottom line. At the time, people were sold a story that fossil fuels are evil and that regulation would eventually stop the extraction of coal, oil, and gas. That was termed a stranded asset. So don't invest, right? They came out with, back then they came out with ESG scores. Only invest in highly rated ESG energy companies because they're moving into renewable energy. That is the future, right? Well, fast forward. You know what you have today? The stranded assets. They're not fossil fuel extractions. The stranded assets today are the renewable, investments that were made in unproven areas or in highly unprofitable areas. So today, the write-offs at BP, at Shell, to a lesser extent at the US majors, is actually in the renewable space, right? And now you're hearing announcements from these companies to say, sorry, shareholders, we got distracted, right?
Yeah.
We unfortunately sent way too much cash flow into unproven technologies that it was not within our expertise, and we're moving back into, what is like our primary business, oil and gas. And you can see if you chart the share price, the stock performance in, European oil majors versus US oil majors, obviously the US outperforms because they didn't get as much distracted by ESG. So the bottom line is this. Today, we can look back and we know that ESG investments underperform. So take the S&P 500, like our bellwether, index. And, you can chart, let's say you have 1,000 pounds. You invest in the S&P 500 index 5 years ago. There's an S&P Clean Energy Index. Okay, so you're 1,000 pounds. One goes into the S&P 500, the other one into the Clean Energy Index. 5 years later, guess what? You would make out of that 1,000 investment, over 800 pounds investing in the S&P 500. It goes up over 80% in 5 years. Your investment in clean energy would have gone down over 30%. So your original 1,000 would be less than 700. You lost money, which is crazy. But ESG at the end of the day underperformed. There were all these seminal research reports written by leading professors at Harvard, just on the take. And they linked ESG to profitability back in the 20-teens. All of that has been debunked. And now we have financial data. You have long-term data to see, holy shit, this was a total, marketing scam that overcharged investors and the consumer for underperformance.
I would like to come to when that turning point was, when ESG, suddenly there was the light bulb moment. But before we get to that, there's something we missed out earlier, which is when it became mandatory. So at what point along the line did DEI ESG become mandatory for these businesses and industries?
It starts from, CEOs just wanting to pander to the public. Again, it's very much a rebranding, a reputational shield, if you will. But remember, you also have regulations kicking in Europe. So the European Union starts with their Sustainable Finance Action Plan in 2018. It's like hundreds of regulations, the motherload of regulations that start getting implemented starting in March 2021. So it does become mandatory with your ESG disclosure, right? What is your carbon emission profile? How many women do you have on the board? What are you doing to address biodiversity loss? But actually, the requirement is not that simple, right? So the Europeans actually are required today under it's this alphabet soup of acronyms, all these regulations that companies have to, additionally report on kind of 500 new line items. right? It's totally crazy. So it does become regulatory driven, right? Also in the UK, you guys have your own set of, regulations where every company has to report out their transition plan, right? Because the country is going net zero.
Mm-hmm.
Now, no one knows how to get to net zero, right? It's all bullshit estimation, but it does become mandatory. This stuff starts in the 2010s and then it goes live, right, over the last 5 years.
We'll come back to the renewable sort of fallacies and net zero bullshit, to use your term. But I want to understand when you, Desiree, had your Damascene moment, your come to Jesus moment on this stuff, having been an apostle for ESG nonsense, you then decided to speak out. So when did that happen?
So I was Chief Sustainability Officer at the Deutsche Bank Group, and my CEO, just to say it, he was an outrageous liar. That's not necessarily against the law just yet. But what I had seen is that he was using...
Lying is actually against the law in the UK now under the Online Safety Act, if you do it online. But that's a side point for another day. Sorry for interrupting this story.
No worries.
Sorry.
So at this time, he understands, rightly so, it was boom time for ESG investing. And any asset manager that was perceived to be advanced in ESG doing this, sell-side equity analysts would start writing stuff like, we have, buy signal on DWS. Share price should, boom 25% because they're so advanced in ESG. So for my CEO, he understood, holy shit, no one understands what this stuff is. There's no one's breathing down our neck. There's a kind of regulation out there. There's no enforcement. Desiree, just go and say it. Just say anything because it's selling, right? And we're going to make more and more profits. Let's get our share price up, right? So we're just going to mismarket our share price to a high level. And then we'll figure it out from there. Maybe we can buy someone who knows how to do this. And the problem is that, you're not allowed, there is regulation on this. You're not allowed to have a gap between what you say and do. So you can't go out into the market and say, the majority of our assets under management are ESG aligned. But internally, we're documenting that's not the case, right? So he's going out and just making up numbers. He went out. So we had about 800 billion euros of assets under management. He went out to say over 450 billion of the assets under management, it's ESG aligned. We're doing good. Internally, we said to him in the board meeting,
that's mental.
Well, he made up that number.
Oh,
so in the boardroom, I said, look, that's a false number because we don't have a tracking system. So no one calculated that because we can't. We've estimated and manually estimated, and maybe the number's not 450, it's maybe 120. That's a huge delta. And so we need to...
So you're still estimating.
We're estimating, but there's but you can't go out with a number. The SEC would choke us. You can't market a number. This is now financial.
Yeah.
When we have no data behind it, we have no substantiation. And again, I'm raising the concerns to say, hey, Mr. CEO, cool down on this stuff. We were already on probation with the Department of Justice in Brooklyn. Or was it Manhattan? I forget.
For a separate issue.
Oh, for bribery, for fraudulent. Everything. Deutsche Bank is the most scandal bank at this time. So we were already warned by the U.S. authorities, no more lying. You have to have complete financial controls. And so I'm raising this to say, we're mismarketing our funds. We're slapping, ESG labels on everything. We have technology tilted portfolios that suddenly we're calling sustainable development goal aligned, right? And I explained to him an investment in Apple is not saving the world. That's mismarketing. We were fudging gender ratios. So my CEO's compensation, his bonus, is linked to achieving ESG targets, which is actually becoming very common at this time. So, he would just look at like, how many women do we have in the company? How many women are in senior management? Shit, fuck it. Get that girl to report to me directly so I can fudge the number, right? And it's like, that's an intern. You're the CEO. But again, he was fudging numbers to show that there was better diversity, just going out, talking about our artificial intelligence risk management systems that are all ESG driven. We didn't use AI. In fact, the system kept collapsing. And there are emails where we're going back and forth. See, that's the thing. We're documenting this in real time, saying we don't use AI, right? There's no system that we use AI in. In fact, the ESG system has high operational risk, right? It's not 450 billion. It's maybe 120. That's the thing, right? So I blew the whistle and I only stayed internal. So I didn't go external. I didn't go to the regulator or anything. I just went to my boss, the CEO, and I went to the board. And I said, listen, we have a problem, but this is all fixable. And our annual report was coming out and my CEO had all the lies in it. And I said, listen, I've redlined everything. Here are we need to restate these things. We're not going to get in trouble at this point. Let's just, go out there and say, sorry, here are the real facts. So, I kept saying it. There was no reaction. And then it was my last board meeting where I kind of have to say I got a little aggressive because I'm getting very nervous. And I kind of I think I'm banging the table to say, I need an answer. We cannot issue this annual report. This is a legal living document. Right? Everyone's going to scrutinize it. It is filled with lies. And a couple of weeks later, I was fired. And the next day, the annual report came out with all the lies, with all the misstatements.
Wow.
So for me, it wasn't that and people kind of misunderstand this. It wasn't that I was demanding that the company invest more in green activities. It was just, as head of ESG, there's a G in it. It's called governance.
You were head of ESG?
I was head of ESG, the Chief Sustainability Officer. So I have ESG and DEI rolling into me. That's what sustainability, it comprises those two areas. But there's also governance. And so I did my job because it was black and white. I did it. I blew the whistle internally. Well, because I didn't want to go to jail. I didn't want to get in trouble. And I didn't want the company to get in trouble. But it was a corporate governance issue. It wasn't that I was asking the company to make more investment in solar or wind or anything like that.
Yes.
So suddenly I'm fired. And what the company does is they don't just fire me. They go on this horrific smear campaign. They publicly discredit me in a Bloomberg article that I underperformed and I had questionable ethics. And they revoked my work permit because I'm working in Frankfurt at the time in head office. And they render me homeless. So it was 3 knockout punches. And they figured that little girl will be she's, what do they call me? Roadkill. She's so insignificant. She'll never recover from this. We'll never hear from her again.
This is at DWS?
Yeah, Deutsche Bank did this to me. Yeah. This is all documented. This is truth.
What year was that?
2021. So when you're asking...
During the pandemic then?
Yes.
Or sort of, yeah.
Yeah. So I get fired. I have no place to go. So I have to, I'm 49 years old, I guess, at the time. And as a loser, I have to move back in with my parents and go into their basement. I have
back
3
in New
kids.
York.
Yeah. Because where else am I going to go? And all my stuff is stuck in Germany. That's all. The company never settled with me. They never face-to-face fired me. They just cut me off the platform and just did a runner.
And a smear campaign. It's much worse than that.
100.
But this is quite important, by there's a side point, but I think it's an important one, is because whistleblowers, one has to be careful with whistleblowers, particularly if one wants to work with a whistleblower, because they might work with you. And so if they're capable of whistleblowing on a previous company, why wouldn't they do that on you? Which, if you've got nothing to hide, you might say, who cares? But, there's good behavior, and you don't want to reveal what's going on behind the curtain in any business,
Right.
just because it's bad practice. But actually, it was them who started the smear campaign, not you. They came after you, and you're acting in reaction to them trying to take down your own reputation.
That's right. So that I have to live with the whistleblower nomenclature, but it's not factual. I did my job and I kept it internal. They went external. So they went to Bloomberg, and in truth, I didn't know what to do. I mean, at first I thought, screw it, Blackstone's trying to look for a, chief sustainability officer. I'll start interviewing there. I'll start interviewing for other jobs and just put this behind me. The problem is that the Bloomberg article was out there. There's an elephant in every room. And everyone's thinking that I lied, I cheated. I was the one that violated regulation. So I sat on it and I just started reading lots of books by other whistleblowers like Tyler Schultz, who blew the whistle on Theranos. But I decide, okay, the only way forward is for me to clear my name. So I'm going to speak out.
You're in a corner.
And a friend of mine used to run the Wall Street Journal, Jared Baker. So I gave Jared a call and said, can we meet? And I explained to him everything. And I said, you know what? You're not just going to take my word for it. Here are the documents. And Jared assigned wonderful people at the Wall Street Journal. I explained my story. I handed over the documents so they could see, right? The lies that were published externally and what we documented internally. And they ran a story. They came out on my side, though it was horrible. Like the headline is still like, fired executive, blows the whistle. But literally this bombshell of a Wall Street Journal article, goes out. And within 2 days, the U.S. authorities call me up, the SEC, the FBI, and the Department of Justice. And they ask me to work with them on a case that they've just opened up. And that is to investigate Deutsche Bank and DWS on ESG fraud. So a dramatic number of events happen. But within a couple of years, there's a federal police raid at Deutsche Bank headquarters, 50 federal agents in Frankfurt. The CEO, along with other senior leaders, are eviscerated or fired. The U.S. authority renders a guilty verdict that DWS made ESG misstatements. And the Germans open up a criminal investigation and also render a guilty verdict there. So they did get in trouble, right? I paid the price, there's no doubt. I paid the price of my career. But those lying sacks of shit also got in trouble. It cost them 14% in market cap. It was over $1 billion in one day, tens of millions in defense legal costs, and those people got fired.
Wow, what an absolutely astonishing story. You haven't actually answered my original question, though, which is that this is sort of your story and how you became a whistleblower, but you have spoken out against what were lies, but you were telling me to take me from Desiree, the ESG ideologue, to now thinking the ESG is a scam, because that part of the story you haven't
you're right.
explained.
So I obviously find out that, at my company, in practice, we were greenwashing. I'm very plugged in. I also know it's not just happening at DWS, it's happening everywhere, at BlackRock, at, other companies. As a practitioner, you start to recognize these slogans, these mission statements. It's so ridiculous, right? You have Goldman Sachs, 50% of our senior management will be women and diversity is our number one priority. Bullshit. And so I, with my own experience, right now have a different view on ESG. But you're absolutely right. I'm thinking at this time in 2021 that there's greenwashing, but there's a good version of sustainability. Yeah. So you're absolutely right. I'm a skeptical believer, but I'm thinking there's a better way to do this.
When did you become skeptical, though?
Well,
Because you weren't a skeptical believer
I
earlier. You were
was.
just a...
Well, I believe in it until I saw how when you're overseeing almost $1 trillion of assets and understanding it's just being mislabeled, my CEO doesn't buy into it. Everything is a marketing scam, right? There's no more thought behind it. You're also meeting up with regulators at this time, and like the kookiest of regulations are coming out that are just ambiguous and meaningless. And what I've realized at this time, it's a multi-trillion-dollar industrial complex. ESG, right, is so profitable for so many types of companies, not just Wall Street. You've got all the consultants, all the data providers, all legal firms, all the task force, in government, right? Everyone had an ESG group. So it is academia, by the way, right? This becomes a multi-trillion-dollar industry. So that's what I'm believing.
We'll come back to that. I want to understand why it's so profitable.
Well, it was so profitable because everyone was doing it.
Yeah.
So let's just say for me at DWS, I I had a tremendous budget just on consultants. So you have to bring in like a company like Boston Consulting Group to help you with your ESG strategy. You're kind of saying like, I don't need that. But the CEO is saying, the board is saying, you have to have it because we need to cover our ass, right? That we can outsource accountability. So bring in all these consultants. So you have to bring in Boston Consulting Group, PwC, who's going to help with all your reports, your reporting requirements. You're going to bring in Accenture to help with new IT apps. So you can say, oh, we need, this feed from Bloomberg, this feed from MSCI. Each one of these things, like each consultant is like $500,000, right? So it's $1.5 million just on like consultants, right? Just in my, just my company. Now you're getting all the other feeds from the data providers, all the legal help, right? In redrafting, prospectuses and press releases.
Yeah.
PR agencies coming in. Do you see it's a feeding frenzy? From every which way you're looking, it's a total feeding frenzy. And then you've got the investments, right? Again, right? Mismarketing, an investment in Apple as saving the world. You've got, a lot lobbyists that we're supporting as well, to make sure that this is enshrined in regulation because it is such a feeding frenzy. We want more regulation, so there's more business. You see how it keeps ticking up. Academia jumps in, and they're getting tremendous funding because every single thing they get funding on, if you link it to climate change.
Okay. So stakeholder capitalism, in the name of helping everyone, created a sort of new elite of cronies who are profiting. So it's not actually spreading the wealth around, it's just creating a whole sort of industrial complex, like you say, of new elites who are making crazy money, all in the name of trying to help maximum amount of people rather than just the shareholders like
100%.
Friedman was arguing.
100%.
Yeah, right.
But understand it also allowed the existing elite to rebrand, right? You're just in the seat, right? Even somebody who I do respect, Jamie Dimon, right? In 2019, he comes out at the Business Roundtable to say, shareholder capitalism is passé. It's all about stakeholder capitalism. And why did he say that? Because guess what? They started to make a lot of money in this area, right? And it grows and grows and grows. So everyone kind of shifts into it. So it's the existing elite has now rebranded themselves like, hi, I'm Jamie. I'm no longer a wanker banker. I'm not Gordon Gekko. Actually, I'm here.
Yes.
I'm Mr. Net Zero. I'm saving the planet. Right. And so, the existing elite is thinking this is the new cover, the new shield.
They get status
legitimacy
from it.
Yes.
In their peers and their circles.
100%.
Sort of honorable or whatever.
But then to your point, it now gives rise to this whole all new bureaucracy.
Yeah. Okay. So back to your story then. Sorry, because I interrupted you there for that little segue. But you basically, it sounds like where originally you're slowly marinating in the waters of ESG and becoming more and more convinced of it. And now then you're slowly seeing the lies done in the name of it. And slowly these things are chipping away. There's sort of it's not one big thing. It's just lots of little things every day chipping away. And it seems more and more bullshitty to you. Have I understood the story correctly?
Yes, it is. Yes. And what does it is that, so I get fired. I can't get another job. No one's going to hire me. As you rightly say, now I have this whistleblower label. But people were reaching out. And so I was invited to join the UK's Financial Watchdogs Advisory Board, the FCA's Sustainability Advisory Board. I'm asked to join the World Economic Forum. I'm asked to join one of their futures councils on responsible investment.
After this incident or before this incident?
In 2021, the end of 2021, everyone starts my phone is ringing off the hook. And so people didn't fully appreciate my story. They thought I really was this green Joan of Arc, that, Desiree is the real deal and she gives us some street cred. So have her she could help us tackle greenwashing. So I was invited to join lots of advisory boards, projects.
Because you were basically an ESG Puritan at this point. It was no, you weren't, but you were seen as an ESG
correct,
Puritan.
That's what they thought,
wrongly.
Right.
Yeah. Meanwhile, in your head, you're going.
I'm already starting.
You're going the other direction.
Correct, and so I'm already seeing this, and as soon as I get fired, I am jumping in. I'm speaking to lots of people, and I'm going, oh my goodness, greenwashing is pervasive. I'm clocking. The market is still growing and growing and growing. And I really, by 2021, it is a multi-trillion-dollar industrial complex, and everybody jumps into it. I remember seeing a banker once, let's call it 2019, and I was talking, as a purist, at that time I was talking about the UN Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs.
Yes. And
I remember him sitting there and he's like, Desiree, I don't know what you're talking about. What do STDs have to do with finance? And I'm like, you idiot, SDGs. But, fast forward 2 years later and he's like Mr. SDG, he's totally into it. And I'm going oh my God, you just see everybody using this marketing ploy gimmick.
Yes.
And so I'm becoming more and more cynical. But now that I moved from one company and I now become part of, big boards, I'm more part of the system. Now I have a front row seat to see kind of what everyone's up to.
So you take this up then. So you've brought in your WEF lanyards, that you're proud to have been part of those lanyards.
To show everyone it's true.
It's true.
Is it's real.
So you have evidence. But so you're like, at this point, you're going, okay, I'm going to take this on. I'm going to take these roles up, despite my skepticism.
100%. I mean, look, and I did it for a couple of reasons. Number one, I need work, right? But I love being in the mix, right? So there's a little kick oh, wow, I'm really impressed with the WEF, and oh, it's so cool to be on a government, advisory board, to help these type of banks out, this corporation. Some of the stuff I did was nonprofit. The WEF is nonprofit. UK Financial Watchdog is nonprofit, but I'm very much in the mix, and I'm figuring I can carve out something out of this, right? I can figure this one out. But all it does is now it reinforces that it's more of a marketing gimmick. You also have at this point, remember, now we're moving into 2022. So, you've got, the Ukrainian war, markets go berserk. And you now have, this is the first time you ask, what is the beginning of the ESG backlash?
Yes.
This is it. So my story's out there talking about fraud in ESG. But now suddenly what is revealed is that ESG was never linked to profitability. ESG, for the most part, the trillions of dollars that were ushered into these investment funds, they were going into technology portfolios like NVIDIA, Microsoft, Apple. So it was you understood that the truth was out there. But now these portfolios start underperforming because it doesn't have energy as part of the mix, right? These portfolios viewed, oil and gas, fossil fuels as the oil majors that was a sin industry, right? And they, moved away from not just energy, but mining, transportation, right? So suddenly these ESG portfolios majorly start to underperform the overall market. So the results start coming in. Also, you're looking at real world issues like, hang on a second, ESG and net zero promised to lower our electricity prices. Well, hang on a second. Holy shit, my electricity prices have skyrocketed. And some people, say, well, that's because of the Ukraine war. Well, no, actually, the way I look at it is that if Europe wasn't so fucking stupid, especially Germany, to go net zero, right? Putin would never have been that bold to invade, right? But he saw an opening. And so I really feel that this whole net zero craze was one of the factors, right, leading to the Ukrainian war. Had Germany been tough and not banned nuclear, not banned fracking, right? Basically, Germany announced, hi, we're going to deindustrialize.
Yeah.
I don't think Putin would have done that.
Well, whatever the case is on the Ukraine war, it is the case for Germany that it's an act of national suicide, although
yes.
I'm of the understanding they're turning it around now because it seems to be so unbelievably stupid. But
not yet.
am I wrong? I'm wrong? Okay.
No, not yet.
Maybe the rumors are wrong then that I heard. But it is absolutely the case that, in Britain here, energy prices are 4x what they are in the States. It's costing everyone.
But Ed Miliband promised that, every family would have a reduction of 300 pounds.
Yeah.
So these are the things when you're asking me, was it one moment? No, but it was the moment where I'm sitting in these meetings and I'm saying, hang on a second. ESG doesn't make more money. ESG doesn't outperform the overall market. The facts are in, it underperforms. And net zero is, we're demonizing the fossil fuel industry. But hang on a second, we can't move away from that because wind and solar, it's not abundant enough, it's more expensive, and it's not hooked up, perfectly to the grid. So where are we going with this? And
more than that, by the way, because we're exporting to make those
right. Yep.
that tech, solar panels, for example, we're exporting that to China.
That's right.
Who are making it with coal
and love it.
Yeah.
Right. They must be sitting back like China and Russia, to say, how dumb is the West to buy into this stuff? Right. We're making a bomb. They're actually destroying themselves, and we didn't have to fire a bullet.
Yes.
But yes, but you have to understand that the zealotry in 2022, 2023, it's increasing. It's becoming so insane. And so it's 2022 where I actually immediately shift, where I'm sitting in these meetings and I'm realizing, I have a seat at the table and these are very senior people. And when you're sitting on an advisory, committee, you're with, the respective government, officials and very senior ones. But you're, the advisory committee, goes across every kind of industry. You've got professors on the board, highly esteemed professors. You've got, your lawyers, your consultants, business elite. And what I've realized is everyone sitting there is a vested interests group. No one cares. Everyone's talking about using the slogan, we're here to save the planet and the people. And they couldn't care less. They were so detached with the real world outcomes. And that's when I would say, wait, hang on a second. Yes, but. And I would roll in, economic data to say that what you're saying has no reflection on real world data.
Mm-hmm.
That is not happening. Energy prices for ordinary people are not going down. They keep going up.
But by the way, that is also why it's so evil, because all in the name of trying to help everyone, it's the poorest in society who it's costing the
That's
most.
right.
It's them it's hurting the most. That's why I think it really is far more insidious than people, it's way beyond the road to hell is paved with good intentions. It's like it's the most struggling in society are being hurt the most by these policies.
100%. That's when I clocked. I also have like the realization that like, this isn't stakeholder capitalism. This is socialism. Because the agenda, and this is very important, the agenda is not just about, oh, okay, let's slap on a green label on everything and overcharge people. It actually, what kicks in are regulations, not just driving up our electricity prices, right? But it feeds into a cost of living crisis where, it just, cascades down through everything. And then also there, we have now new laws to say, this is a transportation you have to take. This is how you heat your home. You're seeing this whole Davos agenda. This is who you have to hire. By the way, open borders are good. So the Davos agenda is much more than just net zero. The Davos agenda is about top-down control. It is about controlling nations' natural resources, production, distribution, demographics. And that's when the penny is dropping. This is about more and more state control. We didn't vote for this, right? This isn't democratic. And it's actually subverting capitalism. We're blurring the lines between business and politics. How did we get here?
So, this is what I totally got this from Klaus Schwab's book, in his 2020 book, The Great Reset. It is all about, it's all about global governance. This is the term he uses, and globalism. For him, that means global governance. It doesn't mean what we might think of free markets, or I think it's about control. And I think that's perhaps what you mean when you say socialism.
Yes.
Is it that sort of?
Yes. Well, it's
ideology?
autocratic. So, I look at socialism as the state is controlling. The state says, like here in the UK, oh, we have plentiful oil and gas in the North Sea, but at Miliband, I have decided to steal that from you, British people, and we're not going to drill there. I'm going to slap on an 80% windfall tax. And in fact, we're going to virtue signal because we're going to import, our gas from Norway, but it looks like we're bending the curve on our carbon emissions, right? That is the state coming in. If people were asked, like, it should be democratic, right, where people choose what they want to do with their country's resource.
Well, actually, funny that you mentioned that. In the Great Reset, he makes this argument about what he thinks is the trilemma, which is that there's democracy, there's sovereignty, and there's global government. Or he calls it globalization, but I think he means global governance. And he argues that they're not all compatible with each other. But then he doesn't go on to defend democracy or sovereignty. He then goes on to make a big defense about global governance. So it's quite clear what his priorities are. I wondered if you yourself were at Davos. Did you go to the WEF? What were your experiences with them?
The WEF is much more than Davos. I get some, folks like, sending me messages to say, Desiree, like, what's your hang up with the WEF? It's just a think tank that has an annual conference in Davos. I'm like, no, it's not. The WEF is huge. Its tentacles affect every part of your life. It is shaping, like, you have to understand that. The WEF shapes markets. It shapes national policy, education, media, and financial flows. You have to understand that.
Okay, you have to explain that, because there's a lot of conspiracies about the WEF, from the sort of lizard people controlling the world to sort of everything imaginable, and for good reason. The world's elites, not just politicians, but the sort of corporate leaders, are all going to this one place and having behind closed doors conversations. Yeah, we're going to be conspiratorial about it, because what the fuck is going on over there? So you say they are, in fact, controlling the world.
100%.
You have to make the case how, because even it's not totally clear to me. Okay. I mean, they're influencing the world. I'm certainly convinced they're influencing the world, but you're going further and saying they're controlling the world.
Yes. Well, maybe not China, right? Or Russia, or, Trump's America.
Okay, the West.
But yes, the left-wing West, yes. Yeah. So it's because, okay, so here, the WEF is about 800 people based in Switzerland. They have 4 other offices globally. They don't actually disclose how many people work there. But safe to say, above 1,000 people work for the WEF. There are 22 industry sector groups at the WEF, right? So it has, a big membership network. And there are 22 industry sector groups, 37 future councils. So I was on one of the 37. On my council, there's about 20 people. So 37, these are all external experts, if you will, right, across academia, business, politics, the regulators, media is present. And so 37 of these future councils with 20 members. Now, remember, each of these sector groups or councils have their own monthly meetings, right? Sometimes it's twice a month. They have all their own conferences, plus there are over 140 projects. I'm not making this up. This is on the WEF website. So you can verify everything they disclose it because they're proud of it. They conduct a risk report every year. So this is how it works. So they reach out to their expert network, right? Their members, right? And, funded academics. And they determine what's wrong on planet Earth. What are our biggest challenges? What are our biggest risks? And so the WEF determines what our problems are, and then they determine the solutions. And so no surprise, it is climate, misinformation, right? Social injustice. And then their solutions are, of course, net zero, censorship against hate speech because of all this big bad Trump misinformation, right? And, woke border controls and DEI to address inequality. So that is their, it is they decide, we don't decide it. So,
You still haven't convinced me on how they're deciding. I mean, this isn't that different to, let's say, a think tank. I mean,
well, they are.
At what point are they actually making the decisions? Is it soft power they have or hard power they have?
So I would say, it's soft power, but you have to understand that when you have people there's no difference between the agenda that Mark Carney has, right, to Keir Starmer, to Macron, to Ursula von der Leyen.
Yes, it's the same worldview.
It's 100% the same agenda, right? The same.
Yeah. So it's soft power.
But it's tremendous power on topics we never voted for. So is it soft or hard? Because it's been implemented. We never voted on to have open borders and, to fund all these crazy woke ideas. We never voted on, hiking up our energy bills because of net zero. We never voted on digital IDs or central bank digital currency.
But we did vote for Keir Starmer. And so I think I agree with what you're saying. But the point is here, Klaus Schwab isn't actually saying, Starmer, you have to do this. What is actually happening is that there is this big kind of conflab. They get together, they all swim in the same waters, just as you were swimming in the ESG waters those years back. They don't hear any alternative opinions, so their ideas are not checked. And then they go home thinking how great they are because they've been rubbing shoulders with all the world's elite. And they are convinced that those are the most brilliant people in the world. They are saying such and such, so they must implement these ideas. We, the people, could vote them out.
Yes, but information, they're lying to the public. They've manufactured a climate crisis. There is climate change, but there is no climate crisis.
Yes.
So you have to understand, the WEF will work with, large asset managers, consultants, and governments, and they're all in on it because they all profit from it. It's hugely profitable. But the most important thing, it's a job enrichment scheme. You're there for life. Fear sells. So the problem is that
that's such an important point, though, because these politicians who eventually are going to lose their jobs, almost all of them, they're rubbing shoulders with the corporates who are going to give them jobs whenever they leave Brussels or Westminster. That's right. That's an important point. That's the definition of cronyism, by the way.
Totally agree. Yeah. There is this tremendous, and people are surprised by that, this public-private partnership happening. So it surprised me. I would be in the room and everybody around the table, especially big business, they're all pro-regulation. And I'm sitting there like, what? Like, that goes against like capitalism. That's against our system. Why would we want more red tape? That just leads to economic decline. We know that. But then I'm realizing, of course they want more regulation because again, like they have their job, they'll get another bonus. There's like, more bureaucracy, right? Because they're all bureaucrats at the end of the day. They're not making anything. They're the opposite of Elon Musk. So they want more regulation because now like their job as sustainability officer or their academic role, they'll get more funding, right? And there's more, right? At these big corporations, if you have more regulation, there's a higher barrier to entry. So you can take out your competition, right? Because you're big enough to adapt to more compliance costs. But you're working with the government. You're in on it. You're getting government contracts. So it becomes a feeding frenzy absolutely both ways. You have... You're absolutely right that you get voted out of office or you do something bad. Well, guess what? You're going to get hired at one of the private equity firms or one of the, the big like asset
Nick Clegg going to Meta would be a perfect example of it.
So you've got that. And that's when, for myself, when I understood that this will never stop, right? Their own selfish interests are here. The people are never spoken about. It is just their job security for life and more funding, more back and forth. But again, it's the untruths that are told to the public. They will promote that there is this climate, catastrophe, that the world is on fire, right? They will use any incident like, 10 people died in France this week from heat. Well, it's like maybe, actually, 10 times more people die from the cold, first of all. And maybe if you didn't have net zero and restrict air conditioning, they wouldn't have died, So there is, two sides of the story, but our media is so slanted. And that's what I fear. So when we're talking about like, hard or soft power, I hear you. Of course, it is just an agenda, that they've agreed upon. But they've also agreed upon, the story that gets out there to people. So voters in the UK, yes, the UK voted for Keir Starmer. On what basis? Didn't they vote for less red tape, economic growth? Didn't people vote for lower energy prices? They didn't vote for higher energy prices. I can tell you everything goes up, right? So had they actually been truthful, right, I don't think Labour would have gotten in. And
to be totally fair, there's a bad example I used by Starmer because people didn't really vote for him. I think he got 20% of the electorate actually voted for him, and it was only because the right was split that he got into power. But the point I was trying to make is that we, the people, have a choice, and we could hypothetically, as they've done in America, voted in someone who goes against the Davos worldview.
100%. And that's, another question you asked earlier is like, when did the backlash happen? It really happens in 2022. You have all these stories of greenwashing come out. You have ESG portfolios underperforming. You have red state financial controllers going like, hang on a second. We've been entrusted to invest pension money from teachers, firefighters, police officers. And somehow we were steamrolled into a default option by BlackRock to invest in an ESG fund. Well, hang on a second. It's like the example I gave earlier. That didn't optimize financial returns. These people have worked hard. They didn't give, their money over to a pension fund. That's like running around saving a polar bear. They worked hard so that they have, decent financial returns for retirement, right? And that's where you have, a lot of people think it was this redneck movement. No, it was based on financials. People understood that this was a scam, and they didn't elect for their pension money to go into DEI projects or to go into net zero. They wanted to invest in the overall market. They wanted to optimize their retirement money. So you have like pushback in the US. The story comes out, financial returns are bad. Energy prices start going up. You're looking around saying like everything is about identity politics, right? People are getting hired, promoted based on what they look like instead of what they're doing. And people are getting really agitated by this. So the Americans obviously, eventually push back.
Well,
but
so much so now that they're being penalized if they have
Yes,
ESG
that's right.
policy
That's
or
right.
DEI
Yeah,
policy.
that's right.
Meanwhile, in 2022, whilst the great debunking begins, Schwab is doubling down and he publishes The Great Narrative, which is absolutely hilarious. And just to a point you made earlier, which I always find this puzzling but kind of funny, he writes of that book that it's a hopeful book that categorically rejects the doomsday mindset, consigning humanity to a future of oblivion, whilst, and then I've listed every single term of every time he uses climate catastrophe, climate crisis, point of no return, catastrophic effects of the climate change in our lifetime, existential threat facing humanity, weather disasters. We stand on the brink of not just abrupt and violent change, but disaster. And we've reached the point of no return. I mean, but this is just a fraction of the book being littered with this stuff. So they're going in one, they're doubling down. But Desiree, at what point are you finally going, enough of this? Because you're still in this. We're still in the Davos elite.
I'm in deep. So in 2022, I'm already pushing back. By 2023 and 2024, I'm an outright critic in the room. And I'm thinking to myself, and I remember talking to Ayan Ali about this, and I said, I'm still, part of like all of these kind of sustainability boards, and, I'm the only one pushing back. I just maybe need to just leave, this circle. It's just, I get a like clearer and clearer picture that these initiatives are harming society. And I remember Ayan said, no, Desiree, that's your role. You have to be there. We need a voice of common sense of reason in that room. We need debate, right? And it can't just be one view. And so I remember just going along with it, always objecting to it. They would put out this propaganda, net zero is profitable, renewable energy is profitable, it is going to lower electricity prices for everybody, and pushing back and saying, no, here are the real costs. If we look at the net zero countries, right, Germany and the UK, unfortunately have some of the highest energy prices. And you can see the economy is starting to flatline, particularly in Germany. Germany is going on its third year of actual shrinkage. It's declining, right? The UK is flatlining. I'd be in the room, here in the UK where some government person would say, net zero is adding jobs to our economy. And I'd say, no, it's not. Actually, the ONS report just came out. Joblessness is going up. And they're like, nope. McKinsey did a study. And McKinsey has said that it should add 10,000 new jobs in the renewable and the green sector here in the UK. And I'm like, wait a second. McKinsey, the one that pushed the opioid crisis in America, that's the McKinsey you're talking about? An old report that says maybe there would be. But your own government, the Office of National Statistics, has just told you in the last quarter, this country has lost over 100,000 jobs. That's the real world. That is what it's like to be in these meetings. And I argue this all the time, right? It is like this, there is no climate catastrophe. There is, however, we do have issues. We have a cost of living crisis. We have a low birth rate crisis. If we're not here in 5 years, it's not because of climate, it's because of war, right? We do have war. Geopolitical tensions, right? These are the issues here and now. And to address the cost of living, just repeal net zero. I've said it over and over here in the UK at the WEF, because that unleashes economic growth, right? Everything today is based on affordable, abundant, reliable, very important, reliable energy. Compute is easy. Like, don't even start talking about technology or AI, because the foundation is just your energy policy. There's no AI, there's no quantum computing or anything. There's no technological hub without good energy policies. And if we do want to move away from fossil fuels, we do that through economic growth, investment in new technology that makes energy cheaper than what we have. But we can't move from fossil fuels today to something that's more expensive because of intermittency issues that also destabilizes the grid, like what happened in Spain and France. It was because of a solar surge. You know what's incredible? In these circles, There's no debate. What happens? I'll raise my issues. I'll put out my economic charts, totally disregarded, and personal attacks start coming.
They were going after
Oh, I'm called a flat earther.
a climate change denier.
Yeah.
That's
yeah,
a very
yeah.
pernicious word,
Yeah.
by the way. The word
It-
deny is
it-
it's a reference to the Holocaust denial, I think.
It blows your mind that you're in a room of like leading experts and it's total cancel culture. It is just their worldview because they're only thinking about their paycheck. It relies on their academic funding, the next consultancy fee that they're going to get from ripping off, taxpayers, banks ripping off their clients. So
It's more than that, though. It's climate derangement syndrome. They're not just worried about the money. I think they're true believers. I think they believe this stuff. You don't?
I think there are a few that do. I think most of them are bureaucrats. They don't give a shit. They just know that fear sells and that this is the policy and they implement it. I don't think they think further
They
than
don't
that.
give a shit, or are they NPCs who are just kind of nodding along and not really looking into it and like don't give a shit and even bothering to look into it, or know it's not true and are still pushing it, peddling?
I think it's a mixed bag, right? You've got a few believers. The most people there, overwhelming majority, they've never read anything. They get their speaking notes. There are speaking notes. This is the party line, right? Implement it. And they know their job, rests upon it. So they're not going to read climate research. They're not going to go on an expedition to Antarctica or to the Arctic. They're not going to even look at real world effects. Right? These people are so wealthy. They don't even care. I remember at one of the events where I was banging on about high electricity costs. And I remember one of the guys in the room was like, Desiree, this just gets really tiring from you. Why is it such a big deal? It's not as if you struggle to pay. And I'm like, did you just say that? I'm like, well, first of all, I don't have a cushy corporate job like you. But secondly, we're here because of a people's mandate. Are you kidding me? Did you just disregard the people you're here to save? You just said it out loud, right? But that is exactly what it is like. So I would say this: no, the majority of people don't care. They don't care to believe it or disbelieve it. They just have they're just clipping their coupon. It's an easy life. And they're not affected by the cost of living. Their wages went up. Right? It's they're not stagnating, right? They're not, having a heart attack every time you have to walk into the supermarket because everything is just going up and it's really hard to make, ends meet on a monthly basis. They're not part of that. They could care less.
So I need to understand the final part of your story then, or at least up until the present day, because I'm sure there's a bright future ahead. But you are still on the inside calling out the bullshit, but you are now an open whistleblower. Not least you're coming on this show and calling this out. So at what point then do you make that final leap from, as Ayan is advising you, to stay on the inside and argue the point, to actually I'm going to go outside and see clips of you kind of calling out the EU elite on X now? And what's the final stage then?
So, well, I guess this is the final stage. It has definitely been a metamorphosis, of course, right? I used to be a very corporate person where I just towed the party line. I was trained at JP Morgan. So it was nerve-wracking to speak out for the first time when I was clearing my name. And then, about a year later, I start calling ESG a bureaucrat. But by 2022, I'm already saying in the press, ESG is a bureaucratic tax on society. It's driving up energy prices. But my language is still a little bit corporate. I'm not using social media that much. I'm maybe using LinkedIn a little bit, right? But still not sure how to use X. And, it does take me a while to find my sea legs and just to say, actually, I'm just working for myself. I have the privilege. I can just say it. And I just start now I am the whistleblower. Right, absolutely. I might as well it's there. It's it's pegged to me. It's on my forehead. I might as well live up to it, right?
Yeah.
And tell people because I have been on the inside, right? I'm stepping down from the FCA this month. I stepped down from the WEF, and it was December of 2024. My information is fresh. People need to know this stuff. It's not just that these are greedy control freaks. this is really harming society. And every single day I see it getting closer and closer to Klaus Schwab's ideals, whether that is with energy prices and grid instability, digital IDs and central bank digital currency. And then like what is just horrific is censorship. I mean, this is horrible, but it's all coming from, this is the WEF agenda.
This is the WEF agenda. Well, as your star rises into the sky, the Schwab star begins to sink, and he has now been found to have been embezzling WE funds.
So the Wall Street Journal broke a story, that there was inappropriate funding happening there, and also some discrimination cases against Klaus Schwab. So he, was forced to step down. And my understanding is that investigations might be continuing. But yes, Klaus Schwab did not live up to his ideals of, transparency and risk management. He was like, it was a little ropey what he and his wife were doing at the WEF.
Desiree, I should ask, did you ever meet Klaus Schwab?
Yes. I've been to several WEF events in San Francisco and in Dubai. So yes.
Anything to say about it?
Truthfully, I'm just going to say it, very unimpressive, a very stiff figure. He can, he only gravitates to the most famous in the room. Out in San Francisco was Arnold Schwarzenegger. When we were in Dubai, it was, to the government officials. But a very awkward, stiff man. That's what I would have to say.
Little did he know that you would be his undoing, or if only he'd spoken to you.
And the Wall Street Journal.
Quite. So I want to invite you over to the Substack to explore a little bit more about what is this WEF ideology that we're dealing with, and also go a little bit deeper on the dark side of net zero, which you've been calling out. Before we go over to the Substack, but don't worry, you're not going to have to move seats. We'll stay right here. But is there anything to this part of the story that you think I might have missed that listeners and viewers should know about?
No, I think I hope we've covered it. The biggest thing is that, this agenda is coming down, and, we, the voter, don't have a say on it. And, it is so crucial, to do what we're doing here, because mainstream media doesn't, objectively cover this. And it's so important to, again, you can look at mainstream media, but you have to, be on platforms like X. You have to listen to citizen journalists. You have to hear both sides of the debate. I do a lot of talks at universities. And the good news is I'm being invited more and more, so that I can bring back, shareholder capitalism, to say to students, there's not just one way. Because remember, it's not just that we, the voter, have been swindled, that this has eroded our democracy, but our kids, okay, maybe that's the point I want to bring up. Our kids are being indoctrinated, right? It starts in high school, in, universities, executive training, right? People aren't taught like there's capitalism, socialism. That stakeholder capitalism is not capitalism, it's socialism. It's about top-down mandate. It's about state control, right? And the other one is about let the market decide, right? Shareholder primacy capitalism. Here are these, two philosophies, right? These two economic models. You can decide. But right now, that's not how it's being taught. It's like Milton Friedman has been banished, and it's all about stakeholder capitalism. That this is the great reset of capitalism. This is the better version of capitalism.
Yeah.
Not at all.
They're so good with their language. It's brilliant rhetorical use. Yes. Stakeholder capitalism all seems so benign and so benevolent and so for maximum prosperity and for the people. But at sort of tale as old as time, if you scratch underneath the surface,
yes,
there's something a little bit more insidious
dodgy
going on. A little bit dodgy going on. Desiree, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much. Let's head over to the Substack. He had a whole chapter in The Great Narrative, which he published in 2022, called Morality and Values. This is where it's weird because it's not just about ideas and policy. It comes to how do we shape people's ethics, which for me is very dark, very.
You can look at the Davos agenda and it's a religious doctrine. He provides this doomsday.
Yeah.
And then he provides the scripture. We live in a world today where for, an awful lot of young people, you're never going to have the life your grandparents or your parents had, right? It's just too expensive. Or you're finding yourself, you're in your 30s and you're still living at home because you can't afford to move out. Why or how did that happen? That happened largely in response to the great financial crisis. What has happened, and we did not vote for this. We've been robbed of our meritocracy. Our democracy has been eroded.
Thank you for watching The Winston Marshall Show with our splendid guest, Desiree Fixler. Remember, if you want to support the show, all you have to do is press subscribe. And if you head over to winstonmarshall.co.uk, not only will you enjoy ad-free viewing and listening and have the opportunity to ask future guests your questions, but you will also enjoy an extended conversation between me and Desiree, where we go a little bit deeper on Davos ideology, what it is, what does Schwabism really mean, but we also look at how DEI harms women, the birth crisis affecting the West and the world, as well as going a little bit deeper on the climate crisis ideology. And Desiree makes the case that the climate crisis is in fact a hoax. That's all exclusive to winstonmarshall.co.uk. Otherwise, thanks for watching, and until next time, be well.